Thank you for the invitation to talk here, and I hope I do manage all the way through. Seriously, this is much better than I was a week ago. What I'd like to do is just talk about the role of our agency in regulating advanced therapy and medicinal products broadly, with an emphasis on cell therapy and tissue engineering. You've heard from one lot of regulators already, and now's your chance to hear from another. In terms of the regulatory setting, it's often claimed that it's very complex. And actually, as I set this slide up, you'll see that it is. And part of the problem is that where tissue engineered products and cell therapy is sitting is in between a number of pieces of legislation and a number of regulatory bodies. And part of the difficulty at times is as you transfer from the remit of one group into the remit of another. We'll just scoot through to the end. Essentially, where the MHRA has a role is in the green part. And we are involved both from products once they get to the sort of commercial stage and are being looked at to being placed on the market, and in terms of clinical trials. And my job is in the clinical trials unit, and I'm one of the pharmaceutical assessors. So what we look at is applications to conduct clinical trials in the UK with tissue engineered products or with cell therapy products. Where there is a difficulty at times is the white rectangle that's marked out as the borderline. And that's where there is the transfer from products being treated as transplants and under the Tissues and Cells Blood Directive, and coming in under the medicines legislation. So the key question is, would the product be classed as a medicine? And then if the answer to that is yes, is the work that's being done something that takes it under the context of clinical trials legislation? Or ultimately, is the intention to place it on the market? And most of the applications we've seen so far have come to us because they come within the clinical trials legislation, but it's unlikely that they will ever get to being placed on the market as a truly commercial product. What is more likely is that these will be continued to be supplied as unlicensed medicines, which is either under a hospital exemption scheme or under the UK specials licensing. So we know that whilst a lot of the clinical trial work that's being done just now is being done by non-commercial sponsors, that probably these will not go the full way through the licensing process, and that we will end up seeing these still being used within the NHS in terms of unlicensed medicines. Now, where the difficulty comes is in deciding whether or not the product comes to us or stays with the HTA. If the cells are being used in a medicinal product, then the early part of the work, that's thanks very much, the donation, the procurement, the testing, all of that is under the remit of the Human Tissue Authority, which you've heard is the UK competent authority under the Tissues and Cells Directive. And if it doesn't then come under the definition of being a medicinal product, it stays solely with the HTA. And you've already seen their website address for a lot of information around that. However, cell-based medicinal products come under Regulation 1394/2007. That essentially is the advanced therapy regulation and includes gene therapy, cell therapy, and tissue engineered products. So if the product meets the definition of one of these three groups, it becomes regulated as a medicine. And that comes under the remit of our agency once it's got beyond the procurement and testing stage. That part of it's with the HTA. Beyond that, it comes under medicines legislation. And there are a couple of definitions that we would use to determine whether a product comes to us or not. The definition from the legislation of a tissue-engineered product is this idea that it contains or consists of engineered cells or tissues, but then is presented with this regenerating, repairing, or replacing human tissue. The legislation of tissue-engineered products as medicines is new and came about through that 2007 regulation. Prior to that, these products weren't designated as medicines, which means there have been some on the market historically, which are now having to be reauthorised. Cell therapy products can come from a number of sources. They can be human cells, which are either from the patient themselves or some other source. In theory, they can be from another species, although we haven't actually seen any of these. And the other part of the definition to make those cells a medicinal product is that there is some substantial manipulation. And that can include simply expansion or activation ex vivo, or the use of these cells in combination with medical devices. And in that sense, these are regarded as being combined advanced therapy medicinal products. So for those sorts of products, there is a medical device part and also some viable tissue or cell, and these are human tissues or cells. And these then act on the body that has an action that is where the cells have the main mechanism of action, not the device. Under the Advanced Therapy Medicinal Product Regulation, there was an exemption brought forward which is specific to this type of product and applies across Europe. And it requires the competent authorities, that's the MHRA and its equivalent in other countries, to bring forward some form of setup to allow for products that are prepared on a non-routine basis and that are used in that one country and are used in a hospital to be manufactured and supplied without having to go down this full route of being authorised and placed on the market. And it's specific for gene therapy, cell therapy and tissue engineered products that there isn't in the other medicines regulations any requirement on countries to bring forward those sorts of provisions. The UK does have its own provisions for other types of products and has had for many years, which is referred to as the specials provisions, which essentially allows manufacturers to produce products for the special clinical need of an individual patient. And that can be done, again, without going down the full procedures to place a product on the market. The UK situation now is that we both have the hospital exemption and still the specials provisions, which, although has been around for a long time and covers all types of medicinal products, it does also include advanced therapy medicinal products. And it has some advantages over the hospital exemption. One of the main ones being that there is no requirement for the manufacture and use to be in the same country. So under the specials provisions, it's possible for the tissue engineered product, for example, say a trachea, to be manufactured in the UK and then sent to another country in Europe for treatment of the patient. Under the hospital exemption, the manufacture and treatment has to occur in the same country. So what do we do, or what can we do to help in the situation? You saw the very first graph, which does make the whole procedure look very complicated. The MHRA has tried very hard to make advice available to researchers and manufacturers, sponsors working in this particular field, whether it's gene therapy, cell therapy, or tissue engineering. And we do have meetings to provide scientific advice, to provide regulatory advice. Apart from face-to-face meetings, we also have an email helpline. There are scientific guidelines which have been brought forward. I think in general in regulation then there is a tendency for regulation to always lag behind research advances, so that there is still some early work being done on the regulatory requirements, say in the area of stem cell products. But we from the UK work very closely with the European Medicines Agency, with the Committee on Advanced Therapies, and they are quite active in bringing forward reflection papers. They have stakeholders meetings. And I guess from an agency perspective, what we see as our role is managing to operate the regulation that we're required to apply in a way that does support the researchers and sponsors in the field, so that whilst we're taking all the necessary steps we have to protect patient well-being, that we're not actually hindering research. And it's true that the regulation in the area is complex, and it's difficult too because this is a very early field and it doesn't have the history of organ transplantation. It is still a young field, so in some ways there is still some uncertainty around long-term safety, both safety in terms of adverse effects to the patient and also the long-term issues in loss of efficacy. So it's not an easy field to be researching, and it's not an easy field to be regulating. But we are trying very hard to provide the clear guidance that the community needs, and to provide some form of dialogue with the sector. And we are encouraging sponsors and researchers in this particular area to come to us quite early if they need advice. We're also working with other regulators, and probably in this area work more closely with other regulators than we do in any other areas. In terms of our interactions with the Human Tissue Authority, that is quite increased now compared to what it was a number of years ago. And it's definitely helped by the fact that we're now all in the one building. And I think the important thing for people who are doing research and want to conduct clinical trials on these sorts of products is do come to us, do ask us. And actually it's better to come to us early when your project is still relatively flexible than to come to us too late when you've gone so far down the road that it's difficult to get away from the way you're going and perhaps into another direction without there being a cost in either terms of financial cost because you need to do a bit more research, or cost in terms of a delay in getting into the clinic. So thank you for your attention, and I will also be around for a little while if anyone's got any questions they want to ask specifically.